Folks, welcome. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. My name is Terry Slevin. My role is as Director of Education and Research at the Cancer Council WA. This is the latest in the Cancer Update series, which we've been now doing for more than 20 years. It's our opportunity to bring people to Perth, or local experts, to identify a topic that's of importance when it comes to cancer in its various forms and the various ways in which we look at and tackle cancer, whether it's at prevention, early detection, diagnosis, treatment, aftercare and even palliative care. So it is an important opportunity for us to bring to the people of Western Australia, to the health professionals of Western Australia, the latest and up-to-date information on the many topics that arise in the complexities of tackling cancer. Today I'm delighted to be able to introduce the latest speaker in this series, Associate Professor Peter Grimison, who some of you may have heard on radio this morning, both ABC and 6PR. We'll be talking about the current research being undertaken in Australia, including research he's leading in the area of medical cannabis and the evidence for cancer and palliative care in Australia. Associate Professor Grimison is currently a staff specialist in medical oncology at the Chris O'Brien Lifehouse in Sydney. He's visiting medical officer at Royal Prince Alfred Hospital and Dubbo Base Hospital, and a clinical associate professor at the University of Sydney. He's leading the world's first medical cannabis trial to treat patients suffering chemotherapy-induced nausea. And his report is the trial is making good progress, and you'll hear more of that detail. His clinical work focuses on testicular cancer, with genitourinary cancers and upper gastrointestinal cancers of interest as well. He's committed to teaching through the University of Sydney Medical Program, basic physicians training and advanced training in medical oncology, and he's an accredited RACP clinical examiner. Before the presentation begins, a couple of housekeeping things. I ask you to grab your mobile phones, and this is a point where I'm always reminded, and I dig around and find mine and do the same thing, make sure it doesn't go off. It's always embarrassing if mine does, and you might be the same, so either switch it to silent or turn it off, whichever you prefer. I'll also let you know that Peter will be speaking for about 40-45 minutes. There will be time for questions at the end, so I encourage you to hold your questions until the end. When we do the questions, we'll be running around with a microphone. The reason for that is we're recording the event. So we record these talks. For those who aren't able to make it, we then put them on our website so people can access them at a later date. And that means if you're going to ask a question, we are keen to capture those on that recording. So that's the background, that's the story, that's the state of play and the rules, and I ask you to welcome Associate Professor Peter Grimison.
Well, thanks, Terry, very much for that very kind introduction. I'm really pleased to be here today, and thank you, Perth, for putting on such beautiful weather today. I did get to walk along the Swan River this morning, and what a beautiful city, so thank you. So I'm just really curious about the audience. I'm delighted you're all here. You can just indicate by hand only if you feel comfortable. But if you'd like to raise your hand if either you have suffered from cancer or a carer for a cancer patient or have close experience of that. Okay. And also raise your hand if you are interested in using medical cannabis, perhaps for yourself or for a loved one, or have used it. I'm not asking what you did at university in the 60s, but just from a medical point of view, so a number of people raising their hands. A lot of my focus is going to be on research and trials. Who has been involved in a clinical trial or had a care or cared for someone or a loved one in a trial? So there's a number of people there. Great. So just by personal introduction, you've heard from Terry already that I'm a cancer specialist based at the Chris O'Brien Lifehouse Cancer Hospital in Sydney. That's an integrated cancer centre. We treat many patients, but we have a lot of interest in clinical research and trials. We also have a lot of interest in supportive care and alternative treatments, but where we don't have quite quality evidence to try to generate that evidence to say which supportive or alternative treatments help, but also which ones may not help or have side effects. I got involved in research doing a PhD about quality of life assessment in clinical trials and really, learning how important quality of life is in people with cancer, but also learning about how to do high quality trials, which is quite challenging. I conduct national and international clinical trials, particularly in testicular cancer, and the way I came to cannabis was not from an initial I wasn't convicted that medical cannabis would help everyone, but I became involved doing a trial of an anti-nausea medication for young men with testicular cancer having chemotherapy, and then through that was approached by New South Wales Health to look at whether medical cannabis helps people with chemotherapy to prevent nausea. So I'm chairing, strictly not the first, but the largest clinical trial looking at that. You've heard I'm also an educator, but I'm also a member of the Pharmaceutical Benefits Advisory Committee, and they provide advice to Australian Government on medicines to be funded by the PBS. And I think one of the real learnings from that role is that the only way we can get medicines that help people to be funded is to have very high quality evidence. Anecdotes and reports and experiences are useful, but that's never going to convince the government to fund a drug. What I'm going to cover today, I will spend some time talking about clinical research and clinical trials and how that will be important. I want to talk about the history of cannabis as a medicine for cancer, talk about what medicinal cannabis is and what we know about it for cancer care. I'll also talk about some current and planned research about medical cannabis in Australia and some barriers and solutions to its use for cancer care. So a number of people have said they've been involved in clinical trials. Clinical research is about people, not theoretical or laboratory studies. Patients, former patients, people who are well. Our particular interest is answering a question about disease and treatment for cannabis. Clinical research might involve patient contact and follow-up, medical records, blood or tissue samples, scans, attitudes and perceptions. It can be done by looking back or following forward. And following forward is very important for high quality research. So looking back or retrospective, you can have a case report or an anecdote. Particular patients seem to have a great benefit from a treatment. Could be cannabis to relieve nausea or to perhaps hopefully control a cancer. But what you don't learn from a case report is, well, how many people did it help? Was that person the lucky 1 in 100? Or perhaps there was something else they were taking that actually helped them. Perhaps there were 99 people where it didn't help or had terrible side effects. Maybe that's not true. Maybe 99 in 100 people will benefit, but that's what we don't know. Doing a series of patients is a little bit more useful. If a number of people benefited, perhaps you're more confident it will help. But it's still subject to bias. People tend to only remember the successes and generally will ignore the failures. So doing research looking forward or prospectively is much more useful. A cohort study will follow a group of people over time. You don't control what treatment they have, but looking forward is less susceptible to that recall bias. But doing a clinical trial, or even better, a combination of clinical trials, gives the highest evidence. So a clinical trial, it's a study that tests ways of improving health in people. It's really about bringing treatments from the laboratory to the people. And in medicine, it's really how all potential medical advances are tried, tested and proven. Now, clinical trials need to ask 3 questions. How should a new treatment be given? And for medical cannabis, should it be given vaporised or smoked? Should it be an oil or a capsule? What sort of dose? How often? Once you work that out, you need to say, well, does the new treatment seem to work? And then finally, the most important thing, is the new treatment better than the best current treatment we have available? It may be useful to say it helped a particular person, but perhaps there's a different medication that works better or less side effects. And a separate and different trial is needed to answer each question. So we've got phase 1, 2 and 3 trials answering each question. So phase 1 trial, How should a new treatment be given? This is the first study that involves people. Again, so it's looking at how often to give a drug, how to be given, in what dose, is it feasible and safe. It might only have 10 or 30 participants. Everyone receives the study treatment, and in cancer it will tend to be for any kind of cancer who've already had all proven treatments. This only provides preliminary information, but I'll talk later about a trial being conducted in New South Wales, a phase 1 trial of a vaporised cannabis to help boost appetite in end-stage cancer. The next is to do a phase 2 trial. Does the new treatment seem to work? You'll still learn more about side effects, but getting a sense of the activity. You might have 30 or 100 patients. Typically everyone receives the study treatment at the same dose and regime. You've already learned how to give it. Again, usually had all proven treatments. Now, importantly, a phase 2 control trial, it may provide sufficient information to actually make a drug available for use in patients. The Therapeutics Good Administration, which regulates which drugs can be prescribed by doctors, will consider this. State health departments might be more willing to approve a drug in that situation, but also for guidelines, hospital drug committees, and individual doctors may be convinced from information from a phase 2 trial that this particular drug, whether it's a conventional drug or medical cannabis, could help. And then the ultimate trial is a phase 3 trial. Is the new treatment better than the current treatment? It could look at whether people live longer, stops the cancer coming back, improves quality of life, has more or less side effects. And this could take hundreds or thousands of patients. I'll talk about the trial I'm leading, a phase 3 trial of cannabis for nausea chemotherapy. And people get randomised, so they don't get to choose whether they get the current or the new treatment, and that eliminates bias. Perhaps someone chooses the treatment for a different reason that will influence the result. This is very beneficial to support use in patients, and phase 3 trials that are positive often will allow governments, guidelines, hospital doctors to be confident to prescribe a treatment, but a phase 3 trial is also usually needed for funding approval through the PBS. So why are clinical trials important? I think I've told you they give you the most reliable information about benefits and side effects. This is a standard thing for medicine, how we adopt new treatments. But ultimately a trial could improve treatment and care for all, rather than just a small group of people interested in a particular treatment, whether it be cannabis or something else. If we can prove it's safe and effective, then perhaps all patients who would benefit can access it. There's also a benefit people actually being involved in a clinical trial. A number of people have said they have been involved. And being involved in a trial gives you earlier access to the newest advances. Being in a trial, you get extra support from trial staff, more frequent monitoring and follow-up, and on average people in a trial do better than those not in a trial because the doctors, the nurses have to give the very best treatment and the follow-up. So just taking a little bit of a turn, coming back to medicinal cannabis. This is what you're all here to learn about. Cannabis has been used for thousands of years. On the left is a recreation of the Siberian ice maiden, who was felt to be a person who in the 5th century BC was suffering from advanced breast cancer and was found in an ice cave not particularly long ago. And the interesting thing, they were clutching a pouch of what was thought to be cannabis. The eagle eyes in the room will see the red circle showing that. And it's been postulated that this person may have been using cannabis to relieve cancer symptoms, perhaps pain or nausea, or boost appetite. Maybe they were hoping it would control the cancer as well. Cannabis has been used as a traditional Indian medicine for many years, and O'Shaughnessy, apologies for the pronunciation, was a British physician working in India who actually introduced this cannabis into the UK, and in the late 19th century it was being used particularly for pain, boost appetite as an anti-seizure medication. You'll see on the right there's a tincture of cannabis, interestingly manufactured by a pharmaceutical company called Lilly, so they were producing cannabis at that time. But then cannabis fell out of favour in the 1930s. Part of it was because of prohibition and it was removed from the pharmacopoeia, but I think there's some other important reasons cannabis fell out of favour. One was plant material was too variable, the shelf life was short and unpredictable, but importantly I think this drug was replaced as pure opiates, morphine and related drugs, and more reliable synthetic drugs became available. So I think as the pharmaceutical drugs became better and more reliable, cannabis, which was quite unregulated, unpredictable, fell out of favour. So I think for medicinal cannabis to come back, we need to address some of those issues. So there has been a resurgence in interest in cannabis as a treatment for cancer over the last 20 years. Research, interestingly, particularly in Israel, which discovered the body's natural production of cannabinoids and the effects on the nervous system, immune system and gut. There's something called endocannabinoids. So it's obviously, cannabis works in humans because the human body produces it naturally. It's not quite clear what the natural role of cannabinoids is. A lot of it may be as a pain modulator, but we're still learning about that. Synthetic THC, so manufactured, was developed in the 1980s. It's available in the USA, not really very available in Australia. One called Dronabinol on the left, and another, the brand name called Marinol on the right, and this was actually advertised as a treatment to boost appetite, so loss of appetite or anorexia in people with weight loss due to AIDS. It was approved for that role, but also approved to prevent nausea and vomiting due to chemotherapy, but not particularly well tolerated. High THC can make people dizzy, disorientated, stoned, and certainly not commonly used these days with newer anti-nausea medications. There's also been a huge amount of community lobbying around the world that has led to partial decriminalisation of cannabis. As I said, lots of anecdotes, so personal experience of people who felt they benefited from cannabis, and some limited research showing a benefit. Interestingly, California sort of led the non-medical model of medical cannabis, which is essentially you go and see a doctor, you say you have a approved criteria, perhaps a pain or a headache or a psoriasis rash, and you get a permit to say, yes, you can have medical cannabis. And then you can go into a cannabis pharmacopoeia, the door opens, and there's this amazing array of cannabis products. I think one of the limitations of that is that it's not always regulated in terms of what products are available. You don't always know what the concentrations are if you're not getting the medical cannabis. There's not a medical person to give guidance. Well, you have this particular condition, perhaps you should have this type of product, you should have more THC or less of that or something else. And another problem is there's not research going on. There's no incentive to do research with the non-medical model, so we're not learning which patients benefit the most. New South Wales gave a waiver for use of any form of cannabis for people with a terminal illness, and an agreement that police would not charge possession in that role. That was motivated by the Premier, Mike Baird, at the time. There was this poor young man, Dan Haslam, suffering in his 20s with advanced bowel cancer. And nothing prevented his nausea due to chemotherapy except for cannabis. That made some big changes in New South Wales. More recently, medical prescription of cannabis is permitted around Australia as of last year, but as you'll hear later, is not particularly taken up because of a number of barriers. There's also clinical trials launched in New South Wales in 2015, which I'll talk about. So cannabis contains over 400 chemical compounds. There's a lot we don't understand. The best known one is called THC, tetrahydrocannabidiol. That's responsible for the psychological effects. It can make people feel stoned, dizzy, disoriented. This can be popular for street cannabis, and a lot of the street cannabis produced in Australia has very high levels of THC, also often quite unpredictable levels and not particularly suited for a medical approach. Something else called cannabidiol or CBD can reduce the psychological effects of THC, so that can be useful, but also reduce anxiety and pain, and an anti-seizure medication. And the effect on the nerves as an anti-seizure probably helps with nerve pain. Interestingly, cannabis doesn't readily dissolve in water. That's why you can't have a tablet. That's why oils are so popular, or vaporised or smoked cannabis. But there's many other types of compounds, and we're still learning about. So what is medical cannabis? Well, the Therapeutics Goods Administration has a technical definition. It needs to contain a minimal amount of THC or cannabinoid only coming from the cannabis plant. It needs to be identifiable plant, consistent ingredients and strength, known activity in the body, and known side effects. Now, ironically, to the best of my knowledge, there's nothing available in Australia that is both TGA approved and widely available. This is a big limitation to use of medicinal cannabis. There's a spray form called nabiximols or Sativex that is approved but not distributed. There's many other products that people are importing or being manufactured in Australia, but to my knowledge, no medical cannabis company have actually gone to the effort to generate research about safety and benefit, gone through that huge process to the Therapeutics Goods Administration to get it approved so it can be widely available. So it means doctors have to go through a lot of paperwork to get that approved. Synthetic products tend not to be popular in Australia. That's one approach, dronabinol or nabilone. There's lots of other synthetic cannabis on the street used for other reasons. But most medicinal cannabis products are plant-based, come from the cannabis sativa plant. One way is to inhale it, traditionally smoked, which is not really appropriate way to take cannabis in a medical setting, but a vaporised form would involve taking some leaf, putting it in a cylinder that heats the cannabis without burning it, and then a vaporised form that you inhale. A good thing about inhaling cannabis is that onset is very quick, so perhaps for severe acute pain it's useful, but it doesn't last very long, so not so useful for chronic pain or nausea. I mentioned a mouth spray called nabiximols or Sativex, interestingly approved for multiple sclerosis to prevent spasticity or stiffness. And that contains THC and CBD in equal amounts, more popular in the medical setting. There's ingested forms of medical cannabis oil you can see on the right, drops, capsules, which is being used in our trial. They take longer to be absorbed, but the duration is longer, which is helpful. And you can customise how much of each product you want. So how could medical cannabis help people with cancer? Well, I think probably the big focus is on relieving symptoms and improving quality of life. I'll talk about the best evidence is to prevent nausea and vomiting due to chemotherapy, but stimulating appetite and weight gain and relieving pain. I'll also help about the hope it will control or cure cancer, but I think it would be naive to think that medical cannabis will cure all cancer. We know from research over many years there's many different types of cancer. They all respond to different treatments. So I think let's do some research and find out what types of cancers perhaps there could be some help to control. So what is the current evidence for nausea using medical cannabis? This is what's called a systematic review, where they combine all the clinical trials we know about. There was a statement that cannabis-based medicines may be useful for treating refractory chemotherapy-induced nausea and vomiting, so where other treatments have failed, but there's a lot of methodological limitations of the research, and more research using modern chemotherapy, modern anti-nausea drugs needs to be done. So the particular problems, a lot of early studies using cannabis to prevent chemotherapy nausea use smoked marijuana or oral THC, which I've said is not well tolerated, only limited benefit, quite high side effects, so not well tolerated, and they didn't use modern anti-nausea medications as a control or very small underpowered trials. And whether or not you do think medicinal cannabis helps with nausea, obviously the evidence has not been strong enough for governments and doctors to be convinced that it's worthwhile to prescribe. So we've got to fix that barrier somehow. For chronic pain, another review said there was moderate evidence that medical cannabis can be beneficial for treatment of chronic nerve or cancer pain, but again, a lot of problems with trials that weren't particularly well conducted. This is the big one. So looking over the internet, cannabis cures cancer. A poor woman with a terminal brain tumour who refused chemotherapy, and cannabis oil was felt to be shrinking the tumour, curing cancer in an 8-month-old baby. Lots of anecdotes, but again, this is not high-quality research that will change practice. So there is some current evidence. The National Institute of Health in America have noticed some laboratory research that cannabinoids could have anti-tumour effects. They could kill cells or slow cell growth or prevent tumours growing. There are some animal models suggesting potential effects, but very little research into humans. There was a very small study in Spain with 9 participants where cannabis was directly injected into brain tumours through a reservoir, and it was shown to be safe, but really not enough information to show it was effective. And again, research needs to be done to answer this question. The downside of cannabis is the potential side effects: people feeling dizzy, tired, drunk, difficulty speaking, problems with memory, overexcited, depressed or confused. There is a possible long-term risk of addiction or withdrawal cravings. This is less than other drugs, but still a possible issue. And really serious side effects of cannabis: fainting, delusions, hallucinations, suicide, changes in pulse rate or blood pressure. So it's not a get-out-of-jail card using medicinal cannabis. It can cause side effects. I've actually had one of my patients, a very sad story of a young man with young children with cancer who chose to use medical cannabis for a number of months, and he was stoned for 3 months and spent very little time with his family. And then he went on to conventional treatment. He was very lucky that the conventional chemotherapy worked, and he stopped the cannabis, and for him conventional treatment was better, and he's spending more time with family, doing things much more active. So it's just an illustration that medicinal cannabis is not for everyone. We do need to think about the side effects as well as certainly what could be benefit. So in the second part of the talk, I'd like to talk about some current and planned research into Australia into medical cannabis, talk about my trial of nausea and vomiting due to chemotherapy, the related trial boosting appetite in advanced cancer, but also some planned trials to help people with end-stage cancer and treat brain tumours. So my trial is sponsored by the New South Wales Government, preventing drug-resistant chemotherapy-induced nausea and vomiting. It's conducted through the Chris O'Brien Lifehouse, the University of Sydney, a number of other cancer centres around New South Wales, funded by New South Wales Health. When we were designing our trial, there was not ready production of medicinal cannabis in Australia, so our drug's been produced by a Canadian company called Tilray. So we certainly felt that nausea and vomiting still is a particular problem with chemotherapy. In truth, many people having potent intravenous chemotherapy don't have nausea or vomiting. Our treatments are pretty good. But there is still 10 or even up to 40% who still vomit. That's obviously awful, big impact on their quality of life. But vomiting's easier to control, but suppressing nausea is a bigger problem. Probably at least half still have significant nausea. So we can do better. There's some evidence that medicinal cannabis can help for nausea and vomiting, but using a preparation with more of that CBD, which reduces the psychological effects of THC, makes people feel relaxed, less anxious, is more helpful than just using pure THC. We designed our trial based on a preliminary Spanish randomised trial that used a spray form of cannabis, and it seemed to have an extraordinary effect in reducing nausea and vomiting. On the placebo, almost 8 out of 10 people had unrelieved nausea or vomiting. With the spray, less than 3 in 10 people had unrelieved nausea and vomiting, and it was well tolerated despite some temporary effects. Now, I think this dramatic effect seemed a little bit too good to be true, but we wanted to replicate the trial in a larger group of people to be more reliable using a drug that was available in Australia. So our study drug is a capsule containing equal amounts of THC and CBD. As I said, it's made by Tilray and aims to have similar properties to the spray used in the Spanish trial. Our initial doses of the medicinal cannabis are administered in the chemotherapy suite. For obvious reasons, we didn't think using a vaporised or smoked cannabis is really practical in a hospital setting when there's other patients and staff around. And so we're using a capsule form, and most patients are used to taking capsules or tablets. If it's well tolerated, then they continue to take that 3 times a day for 5 days after each round of chemotherapy. We also allow patients to adjust the dose. Different people will need more or less cannabis, and they can increase the dose to better control nausea, or if they're getting side effects, they can reduce the dose. And patients get daily telephone support as well. So this is our pilot, what's called a phase 2 trial. Remember, a phase 2 trial shows whether a treatment is safe and seems to have activity. And its technical term is called the randomised crossover design. But if I take you through, you may end up on the top line, and for your first round of chemotherapy you get the medical cannabis. Remember, it's THC and CBD. You're blinded, so that means you don't know which one you're getting. But if you do get that the first time, then the second round you get a placebo. And then after the second round, then the patient is asked, well, which one did you do better? Which one did you have less nausea, but also found side effects manageable? So someone who felt, let's imagine they really were getting the cannabis in the first cycle, someone who said, well, in the first round I had no nausea at all, which was great, I felt a little bit dizzy or disoriented, but that was manageable, then they would say, well, I preferred cycle A, and then they would get the same drug in cycle C. And for people who are continuing chemotherapy beyond that, then they can get ongoing supply. So if they end up that they preferred the active cannabis drug, and that can be confirmed by a process called unblinding, then they continue to get that supplied by the drug company for their course of chemotherapy. There's another group who get the placebo the first time and then get the active cannabis, and again they get to choose which one. And so this can give very useful information about which drug is better. Assuming 80 participants who are still recruiting, assuming that goes well, we'll then do a definitive, what's called a phase 3 trial. Remember I said that gives the highest quality evidence in 250 patients. This is what's called a parallel design. So one group get the cannabis all the way through, the other group get the placebo all the way through. And there's some technical trial reasons why we do it that way. It could be if you get cannabis in the first cycle, perhaps that has some benefit in the second cycle as well. So this is a very pure design to be more convinced about how beneficial medical cannabis is. Who can be involved in the trial? As I said, this is currently recruiting in New South Wales. Cancer patients aged 18 or over who are having potent intravenous chemotherapy and still getting significant nausea or vomiting despite best anti-nausea medications. We thought about allowing any people having chemotherapy to go on the trial. We thought, well, that group of people who don't have nausea and vomiting, they don't really need an extra drug, so let's just focus on the people who do have a need. Obviously, we couldn't have people currently using cannabis because that will confound the results. And people involved do need to be having treatment at one of the 10 participating cancer hospitals in New South Wales. Who cannot be involved in the trial? Fortunately, trials always have restrictions, so we can get pure results. We don't get confounded by other problems. So, for example, if someone's having nausea or vomiting because of their cancer affecting their gut or their brain, they can't be involved. They're having tablet chemotherapy that goes for a long time, or having radiation, that can cause nausea as well, which is a confounder. There are some people where we feel that medicinal cannabis is not safe. So if someone has unstable heart disease, it can make the heart race or affect blood pressure. If someone has a history of epilepsy or recurrent seizures, I know cannabis is sometimes used to prevent epilepsy, but there is also a risk it could cause it. People who have psychiatric problems such as schizophrenia, psychosis, personality disorder, suicidal thoughts, they're at higher risk of making that worse. Or people who have substance addiction as well, where they're concerned they won't be able to stop. The last one's very interesting and topical and probably of interest to you, that people who are unwilling or unable to refrain from driving or operating heavy machinery during study treatment and for 72 hours after the last dose can't be involved in the trial. And essentially this is because you're not permitted to be affected by medical cannabis while driving. I know in Western Australia, like in the eastern states, there's random drug testing, and even someone on a trial, for another reason having medical cannabis, if they get tested and they're positive for cannabis, the police may choose not to have any sympathy for their condition, so they are at risk of being charged. Similarly, if you're having medical cannabis and you're affected and you have a car accident, there could be very significant legal consequences. Your insurance may not cover you for that. So this is an important issue. I guess it would be nice to do some driving studies which are planned to say sometimes it may be safe to use cannabis while driving, in the same way that you can get a waiver for taking morphine if you're not affected when you're driving, but that's not the case at the moment. So this has had a big impact on our trial, because particularly rural patients need to drive to get on with their lives. So we're looking for improvements from medical cannabis for complete control of nausea and vomiting. But we also want to know about overall quality of life. If your nausea is better but you're completely stoned, that's probably not a good outcome. So we want to look at the both sides. Is it acceptable? What are the side effects? But also importantly, we want to look at costs. These drugs do have costs, whether a patient or the government is paying. But perhaps you can save costs if you avoid going into hospital because of vomiting from chemo. That's going to save the government money. And looking at cost effectiveness could potentially allow a drug to be funded in the future. So recruiting 330 patients over 3.5 years around New South Wales. We're well underway in our pilot study. We're going to have some preliminary results available next year. Frustratingly, it's probably going to take till 2020 to get the final results. It seems a long time away for people who want to have better access now, but hopefully I'll convince you by the end of the talk that we do need to go through this process to have high quality evidence, and that way, if it works, it will be available to everyone who needs it. So the second trial is also funded by New South Wales Health, looking at medical cannabis to provide relief to cancer patients in the final stages of life. This is an early phase of phase 1 and phase 2 trial, and it's looking at a vaporised form of botanical cannabis flower bud. It's being led by a colleague, Mira Agar, who's based in Liverpool in Sydney and working through the University of New South Wales. Again, funded by New South Wales Health with drug supply by Netherlands cannabis manufacturer. So the goal is whether medical cannabis can enhance quality of life for people with end-stage advanced cancer, particularly by improving appetite. You sort of heard of that idea of cannabis giving people the munchies, and this is really what it's about. It's actually quite a challenge. It's being done in a hospital setting, and they had to work very closely with the kitchen staff. People want their food now, so it's been an interesting challenge. The other interesting challenge about this, I said it's using a vaporised form of cannabis. And that's been a real challenge because for this study, people need to be in hospital to be closely observed. You can imagine vaporising cannabis, suddenly you're giving nurses taxi vouchers to get home from their shifts. So lots to learn. But the reason for vaporised cannabis, you remember I said that a vaporised cannabis will be absorbed very quickly, have very rapid onset, and if you want to eat now, you want to get an effect straight away. So that's why they've chosen that way. So 30 participants in the first part of the trial, cannabis at different doses, finding out what's safe and effective. Is it actually possible to give? Is it well tolerated? What are the side effects? What's the ideal dose? How often should it be given? The second part of the trial, if that's effective, will be the highest quality phase 3 double-blinded trial. Does it definitely improve appetite and quality of life without overwhelming side effects? So I think I said this is made by a Netherlands company. It's called Bedrobenol vaporised cannabis flower bud. So as I said before, it involves putting leaf in a vaporiser that's heated in a cylinder without burning, and then you inhale the vapour. This has got lots more THC, the tetrahydrocannabinol, lots less CBD, with the idea that the THC is what boosts appetite. It's given 1 hour before meals 3 times a day, generally for 7 days. So who can be involved? This is adults with severe loss of appetite due to advanced cancer that can't be fixed in other ways. They need satisfactory heart, liver, kidney function, no significant psychiatric disorder. You do need good lungs to breathe in a vapour, that's important, and no substance addiction, again, not using cannabis. So New South Wales Cancer Centres are participating. Part 1 is going on at the moment in 2 palliative care units, one in Sydney and one in Newcastle. As I said, hospital inpatients, so lots of taxi vouchers. Part 2 will take place in the community across New South Wales. And because these trials are funded by New South Wales Health, they've elected to just do the trials in that state. 2 more trials, I'll go through these fairly quickly in the interest of time. But there is interest in using a capsule containing medicinal cannabis for treatment of refractory advanced cancer. This is being done at the Olivia Newton-John Cancer Centre, which is part of the Austin Hospital in Melbourne. They're seeking funding, but drug supply will come from an Australian medical cannabis producer. So this will be a randomised placebo-controlled trial with 100 participants with advanced cancer who don't have any standard anti-cancer treatment. So perhaps they've had or can't benefit from surgery or radiation or chemotherapy. They need to be reasonably fit with a reasonable life expectancy, and the idea is to prevent overall deterioration in overall health by using medicinal cannabis. It will contain a capsule containing THC and CBD in equal amounts, so fairly similar to the trial I'm involved in. That will be taken daily, and again you can take more or less depending on side effects. What they'd like to see, as I said, does medicinal cannabis overall improve quality of life? Perhaps you need to take less morphine or other painkillers or anti-nausea medications with manageable side effects, but also looking at this idea, is there a chance that cannabis could reduce the size of tumours or delay cancers growing or extend life? As I said, I don't think this is going to be the case for all tumours, but it'll be interesting to get some high quality research to give a sense of perhaps there are some tumours where it does help. Progress hasn't started yet, hoping to recruit 100 patients in Melbourne. The final trial, again this is not in progress at the moment, is a pilot trial looking at the benefit and safety of medicinal cannabis in patients with brain tumours, and this is a commercial trial proposed for use in Australia. It'll be a pilot randomised trial for people with aggressive brain tumours, something called a glioma or a GBM or glioblastoma multiforme, for people who are having cannabis therapy and looking at adding cannabis oil given at night to that as well. And people are either randomised to receive one type of medical cannabis or perhaps a different type that has more THC in it. And they will be compared to a group of people who choose not to go in the trial. And the overall goal is to prevent or delay tumour growth. So I think it would be really interesting to see whether it has some evidence of activity. So it remains provisional. It's a recruitment planned at Prince of Wales Hospital in Randwick in Sydney. Professor Charlie Teo, some of you will know, is a well-known neurosurgeon who's involved in that trial. So they're the 4 trials that I've gone through. So just in the last couple of minutes, hopefully I've started to convince you of this already. But why do we need to do clinical trials of medicinal cannabis for cancer? How can this actually, advance the field? I think ultimately we want to improve the lives of people with cancer. There's some things we do well, there's many things that we don't do well, and people with cancer could certainly have better quality of life and live longer with better treatment. I've shown you limited research suggests that medicinal cannabis can help, particularly to relieve symptoms. Perhaps in the lab it says it could have anti-tumour effects. There's a huge community demand to make medical cannabis available, and that's one of the reasons I became involved in the trial. As I said at the start, I don't know whether cannabis will help, but the community wants to know. So let's do some high quality research and answer the question. I think we have got to remember there's huge commercial interest in medical cannabis as well. In the US, in California and other states, this is a multi-billion-dollar industry. Cannabis manufacturers are making a lot of money. Interestingly, states are making a lot of money out of taxes for cannabis as well. So we just have to keep that in mind. If there's a little bit too much hype about, some of that's because we really hope this treatment will work, but maybe there is some commercial interest. We need to balance that with the science. Whether or not you think medical cannabis should be available, despite recent legislation in WA and other states and community demand, there is at the moment very little use of prescription medical cannabis in Australia. I said there's no widely available products registered by the TGA. The health departments do have the ability to grant approval, but you need an authorised prescriber, often a specialist or more, someone proven to fail treatments. It's quite a cumbersome process with lots of paperwork, and I think that's because they want better evidence. Most doctors are reticent to prescribe medical cannabis at the moment. One is lack of education. Medicinal cannabis is not part of the standard medical education program. Many are sceptics. They're concerned about their reputation. Doctors may be worried, well, I'm going to be labelled the chronic pain doctor and I'm going to have a waiting room full of people with chronic pain, and perhaps that's not, I don't feel I'm skilled to manage that. as I said, there's a lot of paperwork as well. Then another issue, medicinal cannabis is not funded. It is actually quite expensive to buy on an ongoing basis. So if high-quality clinical trials prove that medical cannabis is helpful for cancer, this could provide a safe, secure supply of cannabis, medicine available to all who need it, evidence to support approval by the TGA, and hopefully cannabis producers will go through that effort, and money and time and paperwork to get it approved. It'll give more confidence for state health departments and hospitals to more readily approve the use of medical cannabis, but also to give confidence by doctors to prescribe, but also for patients to use medicinal cannabis. There are a group who are very keen or currently using it, but there's also a large group who don't want to use cannabis at the moment, but they may consider it if it's shown to help. And also potentially trials could help this to be funded if it was effective and safe and cost effective. So what have I covered today? I know a number of you have been involved in trials already, but hopefully others have learnt about how we do clinical research and trials, how it's helpful, a bit about the history of cannabis as a medicine for cancer from the Siberian ice maiden all the way through to research in Israel and recent use with community lobbying, to get a sense of what is medicinal cannabis, how it is different to what's on the street, what we know already about medicinal cannabis for cancer care, that it probably has some limited benefit, but the research has lots of gaps in it. Current and planned research for nausea, vomiting, boosting appetite, brain tumours, helping end-stage cancer, but some barriers, but also some solutions for use of medicinal cannabis for cancer care. And that's the end of my talk, so thanks so much for your attention.
Folks, I'm sure you'll agree with me, that was an extraordinarily helpful and very accessible run through the evidence as it currently stands and some of the challenges before the kind of research and work that Peter's doing. We've got about 14 minutes for questions. Peter does have to be raced off after this. He's got a commitment at 2 o'clock. Again, we've got a microphone. We've got Carly over there with the microphone. Please hold your questions until it arrives, and I'll try and juggle it around. I'll ask you to keep your questions brief if you can, please. Carly's going to go head towards the top there, and then perhaps work your way down. There's a lady in the middle as well.
Hi, Chris, and thank you so much for coming across and sharing your knowledge. Damon Hurst is my name. My question to you is about the timing of your research, which is obviously essential, and the reality of the fact that marijuana is obviously available on the street at a lower price than a carton of beer, and people are using it, and that's why in America they've gone, well, you know, let's just be liberal about it. And clearly I'm in favour of medical research, but if we look at the global community we live in, it's overwhelming, the support for using marijuana, and if you compare it to synthetic opiates, for example, and the sort of prescription problems and side effects, is it any worse?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So I think there's no doubt that there's many people using cannabis in Australia which is not in the medicinal form, whether it be for cancer or other indications. I suspect a number of people are benefiting from it, but I think probably a number of people are having side effects as well. I know in New South Wales there's sort of a middle ground where there's what was called the terminal illness cannabis scheme, now called the compassionate use cannabis scheme, where while we're waiting to generate the evidence, if someone does have a terminal or other serious illness, they can register with the government, and if they have cannabis for their own personal use, then they won't be charged with that possession. Also, as I said, there's some medical prescribing as well. So that's what's happening in Australia, but there's this huge group of people who are not using cannabis at the moment. They don't want to buy street cannabis, and I think they would want high quality medicinal cannabis with strong research to show it was effective so it could be used. So that's what's happening now, but perhaps, hopefully with these trials, it can be available to everyone who needs it.
Thank you very much for your talk. I'm a registered nurse. I just find it quite frustrating that the medical fraternity of this country does not get together with other medicos throughout the world, there's been research and studies done. And, you know, the doctors here will not accept other countries' trials. So we have to wait till 2020 for the end of these trials. I just find it quite frustrating and quite ridiculous, quite frankly, that you doctors can't get together and work together and provide the community with good, solid treatment. Thank you.
Yeah, so thanks for your comment, and I think certainly learning from experiences in other countries is very important. New South Wales Health, as part of funding these trials, have also sponsored a number of symposium, had experts to come speak from North America, from Israel, so trying to have knowledge and learn from that. But I think you also need to remember the research that has been done is not all high quality. Whether or not you believe it, this drug is not being prescribed at the moment, so I think there is a feeling in Australia that we need to have better research to make it more widely available.
Yeah, thanks very much for your talk. I was just wondering, I was looking at statistics in America, and they said Australia's starting to follow suit with opioids and that. I think it's like 142 people a day dying from them. And when you look at medicinal cannabis, I can understand doing the research and doing what you're doing, but I can't see the argument in why people can't be using it while the research is being done, because a lot of them people that would be using medicinal cannabis may not be using the opioids, and there's a lot of people dying from it, but it's happily being prescribed all around the world still, including in America. So, I mean, it's not going to harm anyone any more than what the opioids are, but they're still being prescribed, killing 60,000 people a year just in the US.
Yeah, so as I said, the governments within Australia, both the federal and the state governments, have elected to go down a very strict medical model, which is quite different to what you've said, and I guess there are a number of reasons for that. You're certainly welcome to disagree with it. As I said, in New South Wales, there are other legal ways to access it. In the meantime, people are choosing to do it outside the law as well. That's not something for me as a researcher I can change, but that's the grounds that we're working with at the moment. I guess I'm trying to help the medical model to generate the research to actually make it widely available. But it is a point taken. It's very frustrating for people at the moment who want it widely available.
Hi, my name is Nina Tinnitz-Park. I'm a medical researcher, but I'm also interested from a personal point of view. And I was wondering, you mentioned the patient that spent 2 months stoned while trying the cannabinoid combination therapy. Do we know enough to be able to play around with the CBD-THC ratios at the moment, or did you have to follow the study design and you were not able to adjust this for this father to get the most use out of it without the side effects?
Yeah, so I think there still needs to be more research to be done in terms of the ratio of THC and CBD, but some of the other derivatives of CBD, some other compounds within medical cannabis that are probably effective. So I don't think we know at the moment what's the most effective. I've given you some examples of trials for anti-cancer or specifically for brain tumours in what's proposed, and there was a particular trial I mentioned looking at a higher or lower concentration of THC, but the jury's still out.
Mine's more information than a question. I've been making chocolate chip cookies with leaves for about 2 years for chronic pain. I'm in my 70s, and it works with other things as well, with exercise and other drugs. But I want to say that it really works. I just wish it didn't have the THC effect. I take it at night, and half an hour before I go to bed, otherwise I'm unbalanced, and I sleep all the way through, and it really, really helps. And I've told all my doctors, all my specialists, they all know I take it. I've never been reported, never been charged or jailed or anything. So it goes out. The only reason that I'm interested in the oil is that it takes me 7 hours on my feet to make the cookies from start to finish, and it really hurts my back. 7 hours on my feet. So I really want the oil to come into, I prefer legally.
Yeah.
But really, I would like to get on the front page of the West Australian.
Yeah. All right, thanks very much for your information.
Thanks, Peter, for coming to Western Australia. You mentioned the expense of these studies but didn't actually give us how many zeros. Just give us a sense of what a good nausea and vomiting study cost the Australian purse.
Over $1 million. Yeah.
Thanks. Just a quick question. If Cancer Council is supporting this in terms of funding at all, or for future, not your trial necessarily, but if they, if any grants or any funding through the Cancer Council coming, or you can talk about New Zealand, I'll talk about Western Australia. Or how do you fund it if I want to go that way?
Yeah, so I'm not aware of Cancer Council specifically putting up their hand to fund medical cannabis trials. As I said, the trials I'm involved in are funded by New South Wales Health. I know the other trials I mentioned, they have applied to national bodies such as National Health Medical Research Council and Cancer Australia to do funding. I think also a number of the medicinal cannabis manufacturers have expressed interest in both doing and funding trials as well. So I think there's going to be a mixture of models, both of government and commercial.
From a West Australian point of view, I can answer that question because one of my responsibilities is administering our research portfolio. So we, through the donations we receive from the people in the community, contribute about $3.5 to $4 million a year in cancer research. It's a competitive process. You'll appreciate that there are many research questions in the cancer field. For the most part, they are what's called investigator-driven. That is, researchers like Peter apply to us for a process. I don't remember, I may be corrected, but I don't remember having seen an application that we've received for specifically research on cannabis. There may have been some early career small-scale trials. But one of the things we do is try and identify people like Peter who's doing the research of this kind and bring people like him across to talk about the research that he's doing to pass that information on. And in fact, just before the talk, I mentioned to Peter that while he was here, he might be able to be in a position to negotiate or talk with researchers here about potentially collaborative research that might commence. He's doing, I think, grand rounds at Fiona Stanley Hospital tomorrow morning, and so that's it, and talking to a group of nearly 200 health professionals tonight. And so that's how we try and promote and encourage that kind of research to ensure that people are doing the work, talk to local researchers to ensure there's an opportunity for Western Australian researchers to get involved and participate in that way. Folks, we're just coming up to 1:30 and I don't see lots of other hands up. I'll predict something, and that is that every time we do a talk like this and people queue up down this aisle in particular to talk to our speaker, unfortunately on this occasion, and for the most part, our speaker is happy to take those questions. But because of time restrictions today, unfortunately, we're going to have to whisk Peter away pretty quickly, particularly if he's going to get a feed for lunch. And so, unfortunately, we're not going to be able to accommodate that for your individual questions, and I know that a lot of people value that opportunity. So, a couple of things I'll do, but before I go to some of the nuts and bolts things, what I'm going to do is ask you to join me in thanking Peter for what I thought was an excellent talk.